just 38 seconds, a $2.3 billion investigation would crumble. Kash Patel didn't expect the question. He didn't prepare for the evidence. Cameras captured everything. The room held its breath. What did Thomas Massie reveal that made the FBI director's carefully constructed narrative collapse like a house of cards? At exactly 2:17 p.m. on January 15, 2025, the House Judiciary Committee chamber buzzed with unusual tension. Mahogany desks gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights as reporters packed every available seat. C-SPAN cameras focused on the witness table where Kash Patel sat, adjusting his navy tie with hands that betrayed the slightest tremor. Patel's morning preparation had been meticulous, but misguided. In his hotel suite, he'd rehearsed answers with his communications team, practiced deflections with his legal counsel, and reviewed talking points crafted by the Justice Department's finest spin doctors. None of it would matter. He had prepared for a traditional oversight hearing, not an execution. Patel walked in like an investigator who had seen too many lies, his FBI badge catching the light as he moved with practiced confidence. His tailored suit projected authority, his posture conveyed control, but beneath the surface, doubt gnawed at him. Anonymous tips had been flooding his office for weeks. Hints that Congress possessed documents he'd never seen, witnesses he'd never interviewed, evidence he'd assumed was safely buried. This was supposed to be routine oversight, another chance to defend the Bureau's handling of the most explosive case in modern American history. The Jeffrey Epstein files contained secrets that could topple governments, destroy reputations, and expose a network of corruption that reached the highest levels of power. But Thomas Massie, the Kentucky congressman known for his surgical precision with evidence, had spent weeks preparing for this moment. He sat 3 seats down from the committee chairman, his gray suit impeccable, his folder thick with documents that Patel had never seen. Massie's reputation preceded him, a former prosecutor who never asked questions he didn't already know the answers to. The opening formalities dragged on for 23 minutes. Committee members delivered their prepared statements, while Patel nodded appropriately, his face a mask of professional composure. He'd testified before Congress dozens of times, always emerging unscathed. Today felt different. The air crackled with anticipation, as if everyone in the room sensed that history was about to unfold. Director Patel, Chairman Johnson began, his voice echoing through the chamber. Thank you for appearing before this committee to discuss the FBI's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. We appreciate your willingness to provide transparency to the American people. Patel leaned into his microphone, his voice steady and authoritative. Thank you, Chairman Johnson. The FBI remains committed to full transparency within the bounds of legal constraints. We have released more information regarding the Epstein investigation than any previous administration. It was a safe opening, the kind of bureaucratic deflection that had served him well throughout his career. But across the chamber, Massie was already reviewing his notes, preparing to destroy everything Patel thought he knew about this case. The first hour proceeded predictably. Democratic members pressed Patel on the pace of document releases, while Republicans defended the Bureau's efforts. Patel deflected smoothly, citing ongoing legal reviews and victim privacy concerns. His answers were technically accurate, but deliberately vague, the verbal equivalent of a legal brief designed to say nothing while appearing cooperative. Then, at 3:31 p.m., everything changed. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky for 5 minutes, Chairman Johnson announced. Thomas Massie adjusted his glasses and opened his folder with deliberate precision. The chamber fell silent, except for the distant hum of air conditioning and the soft clicking of camera shutters. Even veteran reporters sensed something significant was about to happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Massie began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had prosecuted federal cases for a decade. Director Patel, before we begin, I want to establish some basic facts for the record. Patel nodded, his expression neutral but alert. Behind his professional demeanor, a small knot of tension formed in his stomach. Massie's tone was too calm, too measured for a typical oversight hearing. You were sworn in as FBI Director on February 21, 2025, correct? That's correct, Congressman. And prior to your confirmation, You publicly criticized the FBI's handling of the Epstein files on multiple occasions. Did you not? Patel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I expressed concerns about transparency. Yes. In fact, on December 15, 2023, during an interview with Tucker Carlson, you stated, and I quote, "The FBI has Epstein's list. They're sitting on it. They're protecting the world's foremost predator." Do you recall making that statement? The chamber atmosphere shifted. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Cameras zoomed in on Patel's face, as a flush of red crept up his neck. Yes, I made statements calling for greater transparency. You also said, and again, I quote, "Put on your big boy pants and let us know who the pedophiles are." You emphasized that the FBI director had complete authority to release Epstein's client list. Is that accurate? Patel's hands gripped the edge of the witness table until his knuckles showed white. Congressman, my statements were made without full knowledge of the legal constraints. I'm not asking about legal constraints, Director. I'm asking if you made those statements. Yes or no? The silence stretched for 4 eternal seconds. Camera operators adjusted their angles, capturing every micro-expression on Patel's increasingly uncomfortable face. Yes, Patel finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Massie nodded and pulled out a second document. Now, Director, in your capacity as FBI Director, you've had access to the complete Epstein files for over 10 months. Have you personally reviewed all of these files? This was the trap, and Patel knew it. His eyes darted briefly to his legal counsel sitting behind him, but no help was coming. The question was too direct, too simple to deflect. My team has conducted comprehensive reviews. That's not what I asked. Director, have you personally reviewed all of the Epstein files? It's a simple yes or no question. Patel's face drained of color. The weight of his earlier statements pressed down on him like a physical force. He had spent months demanding transparency, criticizing his predecessors for not releasing information, and now he was about to admit he hadn't even bothered to read the files himself. I have not personally reviewed every single document, he admitted, the words falling like stones into the silent chamber. Gasps rippled through the press gallery. Even hardened political reporters seemed stunned by the admission. The FBI director, who had spent years demanding the release of the most sensitive criminal files in bureau history, hadn't even read them. But the revelation was more devastating than anyone realized. In the gallery, Sarah Chen, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, frantically typed on her phone. She had spent months investigating Patel's background and knew this admission contradicted sworn statements he'd made to the Senate during his confirmation hearings. Perjury charges were now a real possibility. Committee staff members exchanged knowing glances. They had prepared for deflection, denial, even outright lies. They hadn't prepared for such a complete self-incrimination. The director of the world's premier law enforcement agency had just admitted professional negligence on live television. Massie paused, letting the weight of the admission settle over the chamber like a suffocating blanket. He had orchestrated thousands of cross-examinations during his prosecutorial career, but this moment felt different. This wasn't just about one man's failures, it was about the integrity of American justice itself. Director, Massie continued, his voice gaining the rhythmic cadence of a seasoned prosecutor, building toward a closing argument, let me make sure I understand your testimony. You criticized your predecessors for not releasing information you demanded to see. You told the American people that you would provide transparency they deserved, yet you haven't even bothered to read the files you promised to review. Patel's legal counsel, Sandra Morrison, a veteran Department of Justice attorney, closed her eyes in defeat. She had warned Patel about this exact scenario during their preparation sessions. Never volunteer information. She had pleaded, never admit to gaps in your knowledge. But Massie's questioning had been so precise, so carefully constructed, that evasion had become impossible. But Massie wasn't finished. He pulled out a third document, this one bearing official FBI letterhead. Director, this is a memo dated March 3, 2025, from your own Criminal Investigative Division. Are you familiar with this document? Patel squinted at the paper, his confidence evaporating. I would need to review. This memo, which I will submit for the record, details specific concerns raised by career FBI agents about incomplete reviews of the Epstein materials. It specifically mentions that senior leadership has not conducted thorough analysis of materials seized from Epstein's Manhattan residence. Were you aware of these concerns? The blood drained completely from Patel's face. His own agents had documented his failures, and somehow Congress had obtained their internal communications. The realization hit him like a physical blow. There may have been some procedural concerns. Procedural concerns? Massie's voice rose for the first time. Director, your own agents are saying you haven't done your job, and you call that a procedural concern. Twitter exploded in real time. Pat Bondale began trending nationally within minutes. Cable news networks cut into regular programming with breaking news alerts. The FBI director's credibility was imploding live on television. Furthermore, Massie continued, his voice gaining momentum. This memo indicates that agents specifically flagged materials that reference high-profile political figures for priority review. Yet you just testified that you haven't personally reviewed these files. How can you assure Congress and the American people that these materials have received appropriate attention? Patel's composure cracked completely. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chamber's cool temperature. His carefully prepared talking points evaporated as the reality of his situation became clear. Congressman, I rely on my professional staff. Your professional staff, who wrote a memo saying you're not doing your job? Massie interrupted. The same staff who specifically requested senior leadership review materials you just admitted you haven't read. The silence that followed was deafening. Camera flashes created a stroboscopic effect as photographers captured the moment of Patel's complete defeat. His legal counsel frantically scribbled notes, but there was no way to recover from this devastating revelation. Chairman Johnson attempted to restore order as murmurs swept through the chamber, but the damage was irreversible. The FBI director had been caught in a web of his own making, his previous demands for transparency now serving as evidence of his hypocrisy. Director Patel, Massie said, his voice returning to its earlier calm precision, you spent years criticizing others for not releasing information you demanded to see. Now we learn you haven't even bothered to read that same information yourself. How do you explain this to the American people? Patel opened his mouth, but no words emerged. For the first time in his career, the man who had built his reputation on aggressive questioning found himself speechless. The irony was devastating, and everyone in the chamber felt it. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within hours, Patel resigned joined Patel at the top of trending topics. Editorial boards across the political spectrum called for his immediate resignation. Even supporters struggled to defend his position after such a public evisceration. In the White House Situation Room, senior advisors watched the hearing footage in stunned silence. The president himself, monitoring from the Oval Office, reportedly threw his pen across the room and declared the nomination a fucking disaster. He immediately began discussing replacement candidates, treating Patel's tenure as already over. Conservative commentators who had championed his appointment expressed shock and disappointment. Sean Hannity opened his evening broadcast with unprecedented criticism. When someone we trusted becomes part of the problem, we have an obligation to call it out. Liberal critics declared vindication for their earlier warnings. The consensus was rare and damning. Patel's credibility was destroyed beyond repair. Cable news networks established dedicated paw watch coverage, tracking every rumor about his potential resignation. The international reaction proved equally devastating. British intelligence services privately expressed concerns about FBI competence, straining the special relationship between American and British law enforcement. By evening, sources within the FBI confirmed that senior agents were privately discussing succession plans. Justice Department officials suggested that Patel's position had become untenable. The institution he had promised to reform was preparing to move beyond his leadership. The human cost was equally severe. Patel's family faced intense scrutiny as reporters dissected his background and motivations. His children's schools implemented additional security measures. The personal price of public failure played out in real time across social media platforms. But perhaps most damning was the response from Epstein survivors. Women who had waited decades for justice expressed outrage that the man responsible for their cases couldn't be bothered to read their files. Their pain, documented in thousands of pages of testimony, had been relegated to staff summaries by someone who demanded transparency from others while providing none himself. The institutional implications were staggering. If the FBI director hadn't read the most significant criminal files in the Bureau's possession, what else had been overlooked? The credibility crisis extended far beyond one man's career to the fundamental trustworthiness of federal law enforcement. 3 days after the hearing, Patel submitted his resignation in a terse letter that acknowledged unforeseen challenges, but accepted no responsibility for his failures. The letter leaked within minutes of its submission, adding a final layer of humiliation to his departure. The resignation letter itself became a case study in political cowardice. Legal scholars noted that Patel had managed to step down without admitting wrongdoing, preserving his pension while abandoning his post. The letter's defensive tone only reinforced public perception of his unsuitability for leadership. Within the FBI, reactions ranged from relief to embarrassment. Agent Sarah Patterson, a 20-year veteran, spoke anonymously to the Washington Post. "We've been covering for his ignorance for months. The Epstein files were just the tip of the iceberg." Her comments painted a picture of an agency in crisis. The institutional damage extended far beyond one man's failures. Congressional Republicans, who had championed Patel's appointment, faced awkward questions about their vetting process. How had they missed such fundamental incompetence? Why had they prioritized political loyalty over professional qualifications? The answers would haunt them through the next election cycle. Democrats, meanwhile, used the debacle to advance broader arguments about government accountability and institutional competence. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's statement was particularly pointed. "When we warned about Mr. Patel's qualifications, we were told we were being partisan. Now we see the consequences of putting politics before competence in positions that demand both." The Epstein survivors, who had suffered through decades of institutional betrayal, found themselves once again abandoned by the system that promised justice. Maria Santos, who had testified about her abuse in sealed depositions, told CNN through tears, "He promised us answers, he promised transparency. Instead, he couldn't even be bothered to read about what happened to us. It's like we don't matter at all." History would remember January 15, 2025, as the day when 38 seconds of questioning destroyed a career that had taken decades to build. Thomas Massie's surgical precision had exposed not just individual hypocrisy, but systemic failures in how America's most sensitive cases were handled. The broader implications resonated through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Police chiefs and federal prosecutors began conducting urgent reviews of their own case files, terrified that similar negligence might be discovered. The Pell effect became shorthand for leadership failures that prioritized politics over professional responsibility. Academic institutions raced to update their curricula. Harvard Law School's Government Accountability Seminar added a new case study within weeks. The Patel hearing became required viewing in public administration programs across the country, a cautionary tale about the consequences of appointing unqualified leaders to critical positions. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a badge or a subpoena, it's truth, archived and revealed at the right second. What happens when a leader who built power on demanding transparency is undone by his own unwillingness to seek it? If accountability can't survive scrutiny, was it ever real? If this story shattered illusions, don't just watch. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel, where lies get timestamped and truth gets documented. Hit the bell. The next revelation might be about your government. What would you do if you discovered that the person demanding transparency refused to seek it themselves? Drop a comment below. This dramatized story is inspired by real events and public figures. All dialogue and incidents are fictionalized for commentary and educational purposes. This is not intended to defame, but to explore themes of power, truth, and accountability.